Hey, what's up, guys? Hey, this is Christian Brindle with Six Figure Medicare Agent. Hope this video finds you doing well. And we're back with another video. And I have somebody who's been on this channel quite a bit the last year and a half or so. And for good reason, because he's a friend of the channel, he's a friend of the Facebook group, and he's a friend of our organization. I got the ever-growing celebrity of Tony Merwin on here with me today. Tony, how are you doing?
I'm doing outstanding. Thank you very much.
You like
Great to be here as always. Always love getting to hang out with you. So anytime I get to chop it up with you is always a good time for me. So thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure on mine. I know the last video we did together was the GA video and the agent requirements. That definitely made a lot of noise. Got a ton of traction, some good, some bad.
Yes,
and
we did.
So, it just seemed fitting that we get together, we do another video and kind of shed some light on some things that people ask questions about all the time. There's probably definitely a lot of confusion about, and that is kind of the process that it takes for different kinds of products and different carriers to essentially be able to move your contract from one organization to another, kind of what that entails. And it's an ever increasingly complex process, right? As we go, it seems like everything always changes with it. And so I appreciate you taking some time and coming on and sharing your expertise on this.
Yeah. Again, thanks for inviting me. I work with a prolific number of carriers as you do. So yeah, keeping up with the process of each carrier and how they handle transfers, right, from one broker to another when an agent wants to move their contract can be tedious. And a lot of agents, unfortunately, are uninformed on it because the carriers don't go out of the way to explain it to them. I mean, they put, in some cases, maybe a little bit of excerpt in their contract at best. And even sometimes there are carriers that there's really nothing written in the contract about their transfer guidelines, but those are the rules of engagement, so to speak. So it's, agents get themselves caught in contracts a lot. Sometimes it's because they don't read them. Sometimes it's because they're not explained properly. But ultimately, if you ever want to move your contract as an independent broker or even as your captive agent from one channel to another, it's not just as simple as like, oh, I'm just going to go over here and do business. It can be a really really big process. And in some cases, it can break an agent, truthfully. Unfortunately, it can really put an agent behind the eight ball.
Right. Well, there's so many little details and instances that I want to kind of unpack here with you. Cause like this to me is one of my favorite topics because I've been dealing with it so much since we've kind of started to grow our downlines the last couple of years. And so we've dealt with it so much and there's so much intricacies that is not known. So let's kind of start off in the MA world a little bit.
Okay.
Because I think with Medicare Advantage, there's so many little intricacies. Every company is probably going to have a little bit of a different process. So let's start off. I mean, obviously the simple one is if somebody is able to obtain a release, it's pretty straightforward, right?
Very much so. I mean, across the board for every carrier out there, if you want to move your contract from this broker to that broker, most of the time, as long as you have a written release from the right person, sometimes that's a big part of the confusion is who do I even get it from? As long as you have that document from the right person, you can generally move your contract, no problem. That is the best way to have it happen all the time because you have the documentation, you're within a release period. We'll talk about freezes and blockouts in a minute, but as long as you're within that release period, you got the document, usually within a week, 2 weeks tops, you're moved over. And a lot of times it's quicker than that.
Right. And what's one thing that's interesting too is like, especially in the MA world, you would think that just getting a release on that letterhead of maybe that other organization in writing with their signatures on it or their principal signature on it would be sufficient to move. But certain carriers have their own specific documents that need to be essentially completed and processed in order for that to get returned. So sometimes that can slow down the process because a generic release will get submitted and the generic release isn't what that carrier wants. They're going to want their specific document, their specific notice of intent. Talk about that a little bit, if you will.
Yeah, there's right off the top of my head, I think there's about 5 carriers that are pretty prominent in the space that have a specified internal document, and it's the only document they'll use to transfer your contract, right? Usually involves your information, your signature, sometimes it even involves your future broker's signature on it. There's a couple I've seen that way, but usually always involves your signature and the top of the hierarchy. From the carrier's perspective, they're only usually ever concerned about whoever's at the top of the hierarchy to sign off on those forms. There are a couple that do want them direct upline and the top, right? But most of them, as long as you got the top guy's signature on the document, you can move. And that's the same with the generic release letter, like on letterhead. They want it usually from the top of the hierarchy. That's the only one the carriers usually care about. But it's funny you brought that up, because there are a lot of times, well, I'll see an agent, he has his release. He's like, hey, I got my release in hand. It's awesome. And it's one blanket letter release with a bunch of carriers listed on it.
Right.
Works for some carriers, but then I'm like, hey, that's great for all of these, but this one, this one, this one, and this one, these are the only forms that they'll accept. And then it ends up just convoluting the process, or there's more back and forth, and there's just more time consumed, because now they got to go back, they get another document done, and so forth. So I do my best that when an agent is talking to me about releases, especially if they're looking to come to me, for example, I always make sure, like, hey, just so you have a heads up, these are the forms you're going to need to get this done. And then this, you got to go get to sign it. So, and sometimes people are aware of those forms. Sometimes brokers aren't even aware, because carriers aren't always that great about divvying out that stuff. No offense, carriers that are listening. But sometimes your communication on those little documents could be better. So sometimes availability, and they update them from time to time. This happened with Mutual Omaha recently. They updated their transfer form, and somebody came in, they had the right one, or they had the transfer form, they just had the old one. Right. So Mutual Omaha came back and said, sorry, we need the new one. Like, isn't that, you would think that statement is enough. It's everybody that you want signature. You see what they want to do. Can we just do it? But like, no, it has to be form 13. Okay.
Right. I think one thing that's interesting to me about that is, like, there's two things that come to mind. Like, one thing that I learned really early on when I started bringing on agents, so 2 years ago, I had one agent with a contract with me, with one carrier, and that's it. I was always a self-producer for so long, and I never really got delved into that. About 2 years ago, I started bringing on agents. Now we have about 80 in our downline. And so that's a ton of contracting over the last 2 years. And that's the agents that, have stayed. Not every agent stays. Sometimes things don't work out. They want to go in a different direction. That's fine. Sometimes we're not a great fit for every person, but
sure,
it's an interesting thing, because sometimes with that, the agent that's moving their contract, they really have no idea who their top of hierarchy is. They just know who they're directly contracted to. They know, like, I'm contracted with, let's say, Agent Smith down the road here, but Agent Smith might be under, an AmeriLife or some integrity partner or someone, and you just don't know. And then finding out kind of who that top of hierarchy is, especially if the direct upline isn't willing to really be that helpful. And, a lot of times uplines aren't going to really help you move. They'll give you the release, but they're not going to go out of their way to make it convenient.
Right.
And that is something that I find is a constant, especially with, single producers that are just, they write a couple hundred apps a year, and they're just trying to move their contracts. They don't have no idea who's at the top.
Right. That very true. That creates a lot of confusion. I understand why it exists. I understand why it happens. Not necessarily right or wrong, but there are often times where, XYZ insurance agency is the one recruiting the agent directly, but then XYZ insurance agency, is under ABC FMO. And then ABC FMO is actually under an integrity partner and a AmeriLife partner kind of thing, because there are a lot of levels in there. If you're in, one thing is almost pretty safe to say, if you are in the true independent broker channel, ultimately your contract probably ends up somewhere around the integrity and AmeriLife channel. As one of their top partners. You can pretty much guarantee that. But it happens a lot where they don't know that there's another upline or another hierarchy. Then, like, I don't even know who Jack Smith Associates is that I have to get a release from. Who the hell is that? Right. You can, if you are an agent and you're in that predicament, you don't know who your top of hierarchy is. All you have to do is call the carrier and ask them. Right. A lot of agents are like, how do I find that out? I don't know. They're telling me I have to get so-and-so's signature on it. If just call the company and go, hey, I need to find out who my top level MGA is. Right. Because I'm trying to transfer my contract and there's somebody's signature. I just don't know who that person is. The carrier will tell you 100% of the time who that person is that you need to get that signature from.
And that definitely gives you, kind of somewhere to go with from there. One thing that I've observed across the industry and I'll even use myself as an example, right? Let's say someone like myself, right? We are essentially at an SGA level contracting with most Medicare Advantage carriers at this point. And we're in a situation where, our top level FMO essentially has, our agreement with them is we'll release anybody you tell us to, but we won't release anybody in your hierarchy unless you approve of it. And so sometimes if an agent is contracted under an MGA, right, or an SGA, or somebody in between them and the top of hierarchy, sometimes the FMO is perfectly fine to release, right? They might have reciprocal releases with the new FMO. There's no issues, but that person in between might have an issue there. There might be like a personal problem, or maybe they're a family member. It can get kind of messy. And I mean,
out of the country, non-existent.
Yeah, exactly. Like, they just might not want to release anybody for whatever reason. They might just be like, they might just have a very vindictive attitude towards it. Like, I've found that there's so many different variables that can kind of go into sometimes being able to get that release. Because if you have multiple people in your hierarchy, they all typically have to approve to let you go. And the FMO is going to be more loyal to your MGA or your SGA than they are you if you're a street level agent, typically.
100% true. I mean, we work by the exact same philosophy you just mentioned. We will always honor any release, period, as long as you don't have a debt with us if you're trying to get a release. And then if you're, for example, if you are working with a downline like Christian, and Christian's working with me on a product, we're just saying arbitrarily, I'm not going to release you if Christian wants to hold you captive, right? So if there's a downline recruiter that has a second or third or fourth generation agent, and they find out I'm their top level of hierarchy and they come asking for me release, I'm like, hey, no problem, but you got to get Billy's permission first, and I would treat you the same way. I'll give you that same authority. If you spent the money and trained and spent time getting a recruit, I wouldn't allow that recruit to just move around you and me cut you out of the deal. It's like, that's not a cool way to do business. So we extend that same courtesy. Obviously, we make sure that the mid-level recruiter will always approve it. But it does get convoluted if there are multiple mid-levels in that hierarchy, and that agent is kind of further down the ladder and he's having to get an approval from an approval to an approval all the way to the top kind of thing. That can get really convoluted. Usually I think in most circumstances, you pretty much only have to deal with your immediate upline and the very top, but it's not true with every carrier. And there are definitely times where some guy that's in the serious intermediary in there, you might struggle to get that guy to sign off. He has no vested interest. He doesn't really care. And he's just, it's not one of the things he does. And just like you said, there are people out there. It's unfortunate, but it does exist.
Right. And it's just kind of comes down to like, the way that I look at it is like, it should be very straightforward. I was talking to an agent the other day that they're like, and I've kind of become numb to the whole thing, as I'm sure you have as well. I'm like, it is what it is. It's the way it works. Like, it's just part of the game, and I was talking to somebody the other day that's kind of newly working with us, and they were like, it's just a lot of this just doesn't really seem very fair. It's not fair to the agents. The agents don't really have any power, and it's true, but it's kind of one of those things, that it's just, it is what it is, like it's the way the industry works. It's the way that things are structured to where the uplines and the FMOs do kind of hold a lot of control with that.
I think the biggest problem behind it is that the recruiter doing the initial recruiting doesn't include his release process in part of the recruiting pitch.
That's a great point, by the way.
Now it's easy for us to do it because, we honor an open release policy. So that's like a value added benefit for us as recruiters. Right. So we're always including it. If that's not your policy, then it's not a value added benefit a lot of times, but I think it should be disclosed. Like, hey, if in the event comes later down the road, we part ways, this is how the process works. We don't foresee that happening because we're going to make you a success. But in the event, this is how the exit strategy moves.
Right.
So, that would certainly hamper some decision. That would hamper some recruiters probably in some ways. And I understand why they probably don't disclose that they absolutely never release anybody. But I think that's one of the biggest pieces of the problem right there, is that there's not a transparent communication between that agent and how that process works before they ever sign the contract.
And that's very true. Like I've had agents before, that might be shopping for a new upline. They'll talk to us. They might talk to a couple of other places, and they're like, okay, I've made my decision, and they're like, I appreciate your time. We really considered you, but we're going to go over here. And I'll be like, well, we take agents from them all the time. They don't release, like, and it just ends up being a negative reputation for that organization in the industry. Like I personally believe, like you said, unless somebody has debt or some other, extreme situation, it behooves the upline and the FMO and everybody involved to release, because in today's world of transparency, all the information that's being available, if you don't release agents, that can spread around like that.
Yeah. No, absolutely. That word gets around quick. I mean, just go to some of the Facebook groups. That word gets around fast. So agents love to share that tidbit of information about recruiters and FMOs. Probably one of their favorite details to talk about.
Yes.
100%. But going back to, made me laugh about some thoughts I had in Facebook groups that I've seen recently on that topic, and I got kind of derailed. Pick it up for me, Christian. I'm lost.
No, you're fine. So one thing, in my opinion, I think it kind of tailors back, and we'll move on to the actual transfer policies without releases in a second here. But I thought this was kind of relevant to the conversation. When I see an agent go into a group, let's say, so I've had agents in big groups where I've seen they're like, has anybody worked with such and such FMO, and they don't release, and they won't release my contracts, and it's my FMO. And I'm like, well, they have an open release policy. I'm like, that tells me right there that there's probably an MGA or somebody in between them and the FMO that's probably the one behind the scenes making sure there's no release being done. And I feel like that's hurtful and damaging to an FMO. I think that's why a video like this is so impactful, because in my opinion, the FMO is doing the right thing. They're honoring because at the end of the day, the agent is an agent of that MGA, not necessarily with the FMO. I mean, it is the FMO's agent as well, but they have to, honor the business agreement with that MGA. But the FMO is the one being put in on blast, maybe unfairly.
Correct. And this actually, that was perfect, because that reminded me exactly what I was going to talk about, which is on point with this. The way we look at it is exactly what you said. Like for an agent, if they look at their agent contract, they're an agent of the company. They're not an agent of the customer, right? We all think it's the other way around, but it's not. So we think about it as us as national brokers, like we're a broker of the company, right? Even though we're serving agents, we're a broker for the company. So really doing the right thing for the company is doing the right thing for the agent, letting them go. Because if they don't like you, if the relationship is soured, they're not going to write business for you on that product anyway. So now I'm holding someone captive that won't write business on the product that they want to write. And I have a contract with that carrier that says, hey, go drive distribution for me. And now I'm preventing distribution. So I'm working against the whole reason why that carrier gave me the contract. So that's why our philosophy is, look, unless you have debt, no problem. Your contracts go, and we hope you go write business with these carriers that, told us to go generate business for them. So that our thought is it's not conducive to the marketplace as a whole.
Right. Which I think that's a great point, because if the industry's thriving, if the carriers are thriving, I think that is conducive to allowing the rest of us to thrive as well, because it creates more opportunity. It drives the industry forward. And I think that's just a really very sophisticated and big picture viewpoint on the whole thing. Whereas a lot of organizations, they might look at it from the short term, to where if we let this agent go, we miss out on their AEP business, for example, maybe this upcoming selling season or whatever. But they're looking at it from such, in my opinion, a very narrow viewpoint.
Yeah, you're not going to get their business anyway if they don't want to write it for you.
Right.
I mean, you might get a smattering of apps out of them, but they're looking for the exit strategy the whole way. And they're ultimately, if that relationship is sour enough, agent's just not going to do business. And then you're risking putting an agent out of business. I mean, think about it that way. How crappy is that? Pardon me, but you're risking putting an agent out of his business where he can't put food in his mouth, can't support his kids, can't pay his cable bill, whatever. I mean, that's kind of right. It could be that drastic in some cases, really. Maybe that's a bit extreme, but that's certainly a probability, right?
Yeah, I think it's a probably maybe not as drastic as it might originally sound too, because think of it from this standpoint, and I'm sure you've seen this a million times. Let's say there's an agent that wants to move over to you and Precision and PSM, and they inform their other upline, their old upline, that they want to be released. Let's say they're in the blackout period, which we'll get to in a second, and the old upline says no for whatever reason. Well, the old upline, if they know their intention is to move, they're probably not going to provide them as much support as they were before. They're probably going to half-ass their support.
Exactly.
And that's going to affect your AEP.
Like, oh, did we not send you those leads? I'm sorry. I guess you didn't get any leads this month. We were short on them,
Yeah. And I guarantee that happens a lot more than people might want to admit or people might originally think, because if an agent's stuck with an FMO for 5 months or whatever it is, that FMO is just going to really they're not a priority for them anymore. That agent isn't a priority for them anymore. And then that could cause that agent, if they're a new agent, that 5 months is pivotal in your first year. That could cause you to go out of business.
Yeah. You ever worked for an employer and turned in a 2 weeks resignation to them?
Yes. Yeah.
Have you done that? Okay.
Yeah.
How many have told you to leave today, the same day you turned it in?
So
Has that ever happened?
I've had very few jobs for what that's
okay.
worth. I'm probably not the great example, but out of the jobs that I've had, it's probably happened 2 times, and both times they let me keep working the 2 weeks. But I'm sure that there's some employers that are just like, get out of here.
Right. And it's not because they don't like you. It's because they're now having to protect their intellectual property. Right. And this is super true in the insurance space because of all the info that they might have access to on clients, carriers, HIPAA information, all of these different details. So as soon as they realize, like, wow, this guy, he's already looking for the exit, like they're just gonna make it faster for you because they want to protect the stuff that they hold valuable to them in there. I have, when I was brand new in insurance and I turned in a 2 weeks resignation, and I got escorted out same day. Right. And it wasn't, they didn't dislike me. They're like, hey, come back and work for us. We love you. Here's your 2 weeks pay, by the way. But in an effort to protect our intellectual property, you got to hit the road, buddy. You're out. So same thing in the captive agent force, or even, independent agent force, where you have that kind of captive quasi-control relationship.
Right. And makes a ton of sense too. Like, you don't want someone going to your competitor down the street and bringing all your secrets with them as much as you can do that.
Or your book of business, more importantly. You don't want to give them 2 weeks head start to download your book.
Yeah, right. And then, and then 3 weeks down the road, after their 2 weeks notice is up, they're on the phone dialing those clients.
Right, exactly. And it happens already. We know it does. So,
Tony, let's shift gears a little bit to how it works if maybe an agent finds themselves in a situation where they're not granted the release, they're trying to move without it. And I know it's pretty dramatically different for a lot of med sub companies than it might be for the Medicare Advantage companies, and every company is a little bit different. But talk a little bit about how that works with the different kind of products and the different kind of carriers, as much as you can.
Yeah, no worries. It's kind of siloed into all the Medicare Advantage carriers and all your traditional products for the most part. Not all of your MA carriers, but the vast majority of your MA carriers are going to, number one, require you to get a release if you want to transfer your contract. If you can't get a release, they will allow you a self-release process, which involves you, the agent, submitting what they would call your intent to transfer. So basically, you would notify, 1, your current upline, and 2, the carrier, preferably just on the same email, right? Send an email to your upline, copy the carrier, and say, hey, it's my intent that I am transferring my contract to Christian Brindle Insurance Services, right? And it's dated and signed by you, the agent. That starts the clock of the self-release process. So now, depending on the carrier, you're going to have as little as 2 weeks. With WellCare, for example, theirs is a 2 weeks, but everybody else is pretty much a 90-day. So 90 days after that, if you still haven't gotten your release, you'll be transferred on your own signature. And if you were a vested agent previously, your business moves with you. There are a few carriers that's the exact same process, but it's a 6-month wait. So same thing, you'll timestamp your day. 6 months later, if you haven't gotten a release, you're able to transfer on your own signature. Good news is, possibly, you are still allowed to write business during that wait period and get paid on it. Now, if you're a captive agent, then those commissions are obviously going to whoever you have them assigned to. If you're independent, they're coming to you, so it can kind of work in your favor that way. The only other caveat to that process is if your expiration date of your end of your 90 days or 6 months falls into the freeze out, which for some carriers, they will not allow any transfers. Either starts on 9/1 for some and 10/1 on others. So if let's say you dated your intent to transfer in August, for example, right? And that carrier freezes transfers on October and they have a 90-day process. Well, your 90 days is inside now that transfer blackout. So you won't get transferred until the first of the year.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think the thing that's interesting to me is like, and I'm just gonna go for it. I'm just gonna say carrier name. So like UHC, for example, right? Them having the 6-month process of transferring without a release. I know back in the day, you used to be able to not write business for certain carriers while you were transferring as well. And I know that. So for some people that complain about how things are today, just know it's better than it used to be.
It's definitely better than it used to be, because it used to be blanket, pretty much the same rule for everybody. You either had to get a release or you had to not produce for 6 months, and then you could transfer on your own.
Yeah.
But that means you're 6 months without producing that carrier. If that carrier is a big enough staple in your portfolio in your area, I mean, that could really be a significant amount of your income that you're losing out on. You know, there are sometimes ways to get around that with finding other products that you can sell. But, you know, if all you're doing is, you know, if all your good stuff is locked up for 6 months and all the carry and everything else is a second rate flash in the pan deals, you're going to have a tough time for 6 months for a while.
That's right.
Since then, and I think Medico, to be honest with you, if I remember correctly, Medico was the first company that came out with the self-release process. They're one of the only carriers that has a self-release process in what I just call the traditional products, non-Medicare Advantage contracts, right? Traditional MedSup ancillary type products. And there's the same concept. You document it, you let them know, hey, here's the letter I sent to my upline. You know, here's the day I sent it. Let's start counting the 6 months. And then in that 6 months, you should be aggressively negotiating with that upline to try to speed up the process for you. But in the event it doesn't get done in 6 months, Medico, same thing. They allow you to transfer on your own signature. Most other non-traditional or most other traditional products out there in the MedSup final expense world, they still run on the 6-month rule. You want to transfer a contract, don't produce for 6 months or get a release. Pick one. That's rough, but that's the way it is.
Right, for sure. And shout out to Medico, by the way.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure, I'm 90% sure they were the first carrier in the whole Medicare space to come out with that. And then Medicare Advantage carriers started following it. I think, and maybe this is just my rose-colored glasses, but I think that the rest of the industry or most of the industry will pick up to that process.
Yeah,
I think it's just a matter of time.
I feel like as we go, things seem to get more streamlined in terms of efficiency and you know, really just making things easier for the companies, easier for the uplines, easier for the agents. And so I feel like that I would be surprised if things did not kind of move in that direction.
Correct. Well, the carriers, I mean, it's not going to, if they haven't already realized, I'm sure they have, it's not going to take them much longer to realize that the 6-month non-production or get a release deal loses business for them.
Ultimately. Right.
They're losing money on that value proposition.
That agent could be, you know, a great producer for you, and you're just telling them you can't write business for 6 months with us. Well, how does that help you as the carrier?
Correct. Yeah, it doesn't help the carrier at all.
But like,
interesting.
Kind of circling back though, and I kind of got off the rails there for a second there, so my fault. But with United, for example, right, with their 6-month release process, being in the blackout period for 10/1, for example, really, I mean, if you can't get a release with them by 4/1, you're going to be with that upline the rest of the year. Like, I don't think people really realize that. That's why, like, in some of these groups, that discussion is being had earlier on in the year, in the first and second quarter of the year. Whereas like with maybe a Humana, with an Aetna, it's more of a 90-day process. So you have until 7/1 to kind of put in that request to kind of get moved over.
But April 1st is the cutoff day. If you don't have it ready to go, I mean, there's a cutoff day to submit your intent, right? If you can walk up all the way to 9/1 with a release in hand and get that done. But if you don't have a release in hand, you better have it documented that you want to transfer your contract by 4/1, or you ain't moving till the next year at best.
So touch on that a little bit, because I know that's another thing that I feel like a lot of agents don't quite understand. So like if you have an intent that is in place for you to move to another upline and it falls into the blackout period, how does that work in the next year?
Your transfer is approved because you've gone the 90 days, but because it's in the blackout period, it won't take place until 1/1 the next year.
So with some companies, don't they have to put in a new intent the next year with certain companies? Not with all, but a few. Do I have that right?
Not that I'm aware of. They certainly generally have to complete a new contract with their new upline, and they also can't change. Like they can't be like, oh, I put my intent to transfer to Precision Senior Marketing, and then that date comes around, and they're like, hey, you ready to exercise your transfer? It's like, no, I want to go with Christian Brindle. They're like, sorry, that doesn't work. It's either you stay where you are, you go to PSM because that was your intent. So either you want to exercise it or you don't. But if now you want to switch gears, now you got to write a new intent. That's the only time I'm aware of that you have to actually redocument your intent. Now there is with Anthem, right? Well, now with some of them, you can just send them the email, right? Well, Anthem requires you to reprove your documentation at time of transfer. And there's a 6 months too, just like UHC. So that's a little unique, right? So you've already sent it once and started your clock, but then 6 months later, you have to come back and go, no, I still have my proof. It's right here. Remember, today's the day.
Right.
Kind of strange, little weird, but.
So, and then those agents that fall into the blackout, they're stuck where they are during AEP, but then 1/1 of the next year, then they are able to recontract with their new destination or anything like that.
That is correct.
One thing that's interesting that I'm sure a lot of people that see this might fall into this category is if somebody has maybe been working in a call center or they're with a captive shop. A lot of times I find that if someone's trying to maybe go independent or they're trying to move to another organization, sometimes their contracts it's not a traditional release process. They end up finding their contracts being terminated instead, which kind of is in a whole different ballpark in terms of kind of what they have to go through.
Yeah, it can be. And some of that process will vary by carrier. In some cases, that's not a bad deal. And that's actually how Humana handles transfers. They end up terminating the old contract, which isn't a bad thing. I mean, if it's a vested thing, you're still getting your renewals. If you're a captive agent, you weren't getting renewals in the first place. So it doesn't matter. If you're terminated, you're terminated. But they do allow you to just immediately submit a new contract and get reinstated and go with your new broker. What you never want to do as an agent, I would say almost never. It's probably very limited exemption on this. Don't self-terminate. A lot of the carriers have a clause in their contract that says if you self-terminate thinking, oh, I can just terminate my contract and I'll just go get recontracted elsewhere. No. There's a clause in there that says if you self-terminate, you got to wait 6 months or a year to recontract. So don't ever as an agent think, oh, I'll just go terminate it and then I'll just go recon. Don't do that. Yeah. If the upline terminates you, that's a different thing. That's cool because the carrier understands, well, that's not you terminating. That's the upline doing it. So you're okay to go recontract. But if you self-terminate, they're not going to allow you to recontract for a period of time.
Yeah.
And it could be as long as a year.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that. So I'm learning something on this video. One thing that is kind of interesting to also talk about is like, let's go back to, let's say if an agent is able to get their releases, they get their notice of intents with like an Aetna, right? And Mutual of Omaha transfer forms and things like that. Some carriers for agents that have downline, their downline moves with them. Whereas with other carriers, every individual agent needs to recontract. I've always found that kind of interesting because when agents are trying to move and let's say they have a little agency and they have maybe 10 agents in their hierarchy, that is something that a lot of times they don't think about. Because they might obtain a release from their FMO that has their name on it, but then it doesn't mention anything about any of their downline. And like with a company like a Humana or an Anthem where the hierarchy doesn't show and it's all internal with the FMO, that isn't going to fly.
Correct.
And that's something that agencies need to be aware of if you're moving with downline is like, if you're going to get a release, it's probably in your best interest to get a release that mentions every agent by name is what I found.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes that can be a blanket release that lists all the agents, right? Or maybe it's an addendum to the release. Like here's a release letter for ABC agency and the principal's name. And then it includes the agents listed in addendum A. And it puts all their names and agent numbers on it. That works in a lot of cases, not all of them, but can work. Some of them, like say Mutual Omaha, that has their standardized form. Well, that won't work. Either everybody's going to have to get one, but Mutual Omaha will usually do a mass transfer for you on the back end through internally. This has to be documented properly, and I've moved some pretty large groups with them, so they're really cool about that. There are other companies out there that want every agent has to get his individual release. Every agent has to sign a new contract. But there are some that make it easy, and the release form just says remove me or release me and all my downline. And as long as everybody agrees on it, the whole thing moves over. Sometimes it's just some extra notation, and sometimes it's a big paperwork process. So usually what you want to ask if you are an agency and you're looking at moving your agency contract with any carrier that has a bunch of downlines on it, ask that new broker or ask the carrier directly, more importantly, if they allow mass transfers. They'll know exactly what you mean if you ask them that. Just call the contracting department, like, hey, do you guys allow mass transfers? I got 35 agents. We all want to go. And they're like, oh, yes, we do. Or like, oh, no, we don't. Everybody's got to get documented.
One thing I wanted to ask you about, Tony, that is, in my opinion, I never hear get talked about. With certain carriers, there's one in particular, but I don't want to say their name about this specific one because I've heard it rumored. I don't know if it's true. If somebody is, let's say, above a street level agent, let's say someone has been granted a GA contract, an MGA contract, an FMO contract, SGA contract, whatever the terminology might be, and let's say the upline is not willing to release them. I think it's pretty few and far between, but isn't it true that some carriers, the agent essentially can never move?
It's pretty close. There's only one that I know of. Well, I'm sure we're thinking of the same one, but if you do have an upper level contract, that self-release process does not apply, which it's just incredibly annoying and ridiculous. I don't fully understand their thought process on that. I know that they're thinking of it in the terms of protecting the hierarchy because it's stable and producing theoretically. But outside of that, I really don't get why they tied that group of agents' hands, that have a GA or MGA type level, that they've earned that. And then now they want to move it. And while the other carriers make it easy, just sign off, transfer the whole group, and you're gone. That's another thing that, if you do have an agency level deal where you're upper level, verify before you commit to any agreement. Like, hey, am I going to be able to move using the self-release process for this carrier? And will it include my whole downline, right? Will I maintain the level that I'm at? One other thing, speaking of levels, and a lot of people maybe aren't aware of this, and sometimes, I hate to say it, but sometimes marketers will use this to trick agents into moving their contract, or they won't disclose this. But usually when you move your contract, you can only move it at the same level. You can't go up for a period of time. Right? There are some limited exceptions in that. Right. Like Humana is generally a limited exception because usually they have a third-party administrator, so they can finagle and get some approval on different levels. But if you're on a lot of the direct pay products that have what they feel are benchmarks for certain levels, and you're at a GA, well, they're not going to allow you to move you at an MGA or at an FMO level all of a sudden. Generally, you're going to have to come back over, wait a period of time. Usually it's 6 months before they can look at increasing you. And then in many cases, you're going to have to prove that you have the production or the recruits to do it anyway. But that can be that's tedious, and I find that trick happen more in the Medicare supplement space than anything. Right? Somebody's got a 20, and the other guy's promised him. He's like, "Well, what can you do for me, old man? I'm writing this product. I'm getting 20%." He's like, "Well, I can give you the 22." He's like, "All right, I'll sign a new contract with you." Like, well, it's going to be 6 months before that 22 comes through for the guy.
Right.
Which, not that that's a terrible thing. But is that something that's disclosed up front or not? Or are you telling that guy, like, "Hey, look, I can get you 22." Because you are doing the volume to deserve it, but the carrier won't let me give it to you for 6 months, right? I've seen people, it's happened to me. I've had contracts from me moved because someone else promised them more commission points, and then it turns out they weren't able to give it to them. Because of that clause. So that's another thing to consider and remember and look out for.
Yeah, and a lot of organizations too will kind of, that are really just contract flingers is what I call them, where they're just flinging.
I have a much more color word, but I won't repeat it.
But like they'll recruit in maybe the Medicare Advantage space, and they'll say, well, let's say, okay, let's take it back to the other video we did not too long ago about the GA contracts. They might say, well, your up FMO won't give you a GA contract and without 5 agents. I'll give it to you for 3, or I'll give it to you for 2, I'll give it to you for 1, or whatever the case might be. But they might not include in that conversation that you're essentially looking at 6 to 12 months of waiting once you've moved to be able to
before you can move up. Right. Yeah. Because I mean, not only is it that you have to wait 6 months before you can even increase the contract, but then if you're in the freeze out period, well, you can't move it up during that period either. So now it's a period of like 10 months that we're not going to be able to give you the contract that we promised you.
Right. And I can speak to UHC's process because they do the 12-month. I can speak to that, how painful that is, because, a couple of years ago, we moved our UHC contract from a local FMO here in Utah to another FMO. And, we were kind of told that it was going to be that way up front, but I ended up stuck as a GA for a year. And that was insanely painful as I was trying to recruit. Like, it was painful. I qualified to be higher, and it just restricts your growth because you can't offer anything but street level to anybody at that point. And so it just makes everything very, very difficult. And I think that's something that if you guys walk away from anything with anything from this video, just keep that in mind if you have any desire to recruit, because it might not seem like a big deal, but it's going to be a big deal if you're trying to recruit, unless you're just recruiting strictly brand newly licensed neophyte agents. Right.
But yeah, most agents I see that most agents I see that get themselves in trouble regarding transfers are those that they don't know what they're up against. They don't really understand the process at all. And a lot of them procrastinate, not realizing how long it could take to actually get your contracts transferred in the manner that you truly want. So, ultimately, if we all just disclosed it up front what the exit process was, I think that would eliminate most of the confusion, but that's probably asking way too much.
Right. Well, Tony, I want to be respectful of your time. I think this has been an insanely value-driven video, and I appreciate you for it. 2 more questions I wanted to pick your brain about, if I can. Let's say there's an agent let's say an agent is around this time of the year, and they want to move their contracts before AEP. They're not being given a release. Maybe they're being given the runaround a little bit. Is there anything this agent can do in terms of working with the current FMO to try to get those releases? Like, what is a good strategy? Or is there a good tactic that maybe you would advise an agent to maybe try to get that release so that way they might be able to transfer before AEP?
Yeah. That you always get, you catch more flies with honey than vinegar?
Yes.
Right? Or don't go kicking the beehive, man. Don't come at the FMO that you are about to ask a favor for, beating them up.
Right.
Like, hey, you're terrible. You guys suck. I don't want to work with y'all. You didn't do this. You didn't do that. And by the way, can I get a release, please? They're going to give you the finger. And I almost don't blame them because you just attacked them. Be nice. Be professional. Number 1 key, be professional. Even if they're not professional, be a bigger person, be professional. But usually what I find is best, ask nicely and just tell them like, hey, look, man, you've been great, even if they've been crappy. Just like, look, it's been a really good opportunity. I've actually learned some stuff from you guys. But at the point that I'm at in my career now, I have some opportunities that I can really attach to and grow, that I'm going to get a different type of support than you guys are giving me. No offense to y'all, but it would really mean a lot to me and my family. If you help me sign off on this release and I can move, right? So I mean, put a little bit of in there, but
give them
be professional, number 1, but give them a reason why you need to move. Don't just be like, hey, you guys suck, y'all didn't do any of that, I want to move. Like, well, they're not going to make it easy for you. You catch more flies with honey than vinegar. So be nice and professional about it, but give them a reason of why you need to move. Not because y'all suck. It's because of me. I suck, and I need someone that's going to give me the support and structure that I need that I'm just not quite getting here. You guys have done a great job, but this is the opportunity I need for me and my family, and I would really appreciate if you could sign off on this so we can just part ways. Best way to do it. And more often than not, I think you'll get rewarded that way.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you. I think you hit it right on the head. I've always told agents in that situation. I actually talked to 2 people this week that found themselves in that situation, and they're trying to move to us. And I told them, I was like, if I were you, because they were, talking about going into forums and threads and just bashing uplines. I'm like, it's not going to help. I'm like,
you're not going to do anybody any favors.
Right. I mean, what I told them was, I was like, if I were you, I would call your contact, or I would send an email, or whatever the case, whatever your preferred method of communication is. And I would, number one, be incredibly nice, be incredibly complimentary, point out specific things that they've done, that they've tried to help you. So that way you're making them feel appreciated for their efforts. And don't be afraid to give them a little bit of a sob story, like you said, like, I'm just worried about taking care of my family, got a kid on the way, whatever the case might be, and I think a majority of people in our industry, I think, have a heart. I feel there's some that don't have a heart and they're just evil gremlins, but yeah, I think that's few and far between these days. I just don't feel like we see as many of that as we used to.
No, I would agree. That was my first step. Number one, be nice, be professional, ask nicely, ask properly, and give them a reason really why you need to move. Number two, well, maybe before you do that, call the carrier that you're wanting to get released and ask them, hey, who do I need to sign the release document for me to move my contract? And just make sure you're even barking up the wrong tree in the first place. And if you find out it's not your normal contact that's direct to you, then call that guy and go, hey, I've done some I'm working on getting a release and blah, blah, blah. Can you help me? Right. Go through that professional process. But now you also are fueled with some ammo, because that, like, hey, I know it's not you, calling you because you're my first guy. Can you help me get this done by the guys over at Integrity or the guys over at Agent Pipeline, or wherever it is? I'm just using arbitrary names. Don't take any stock in any of those that I said, but just, can you help me get this fielded from the next guy up? That's the one that actually has to sign it, please. Right. Because I got to feed my family, man. Cable's expensive.
Yeah. I got 10 streaming services I got to pay for.
Yeah. But I mean, truthfully, just the biggest thing I think is be professional, and remember that you can always call the insurance carrier you're wanting to move your contract. They'll tell you exactly who you need to sign it. And what document you need is acceptable. So be resourceful that way.
I think that's such great advice. I know me early on in my career, when I was incredibly young, I was maybe 22, 23, 24. I would get angry with marketers, carrier reps, people like that. And I would just kind of lash out on them, and it never did any favors. I feel like I'm definitely not a finished product, but I feel like I've learned exactly what you said a moment ago. I think I learned it from Justin, more first and foremost, that, you catch more flies with honey than vinegar. And it's not going to behoove you one bit to be a jerk, because nobody wants to help a jerk.
Yeah. Yeah. Even if you do believe that FMO's fallen short, if you're going to be a jerk, at least wait until after they've signed off on your transfer. Then you can maybe be a jerk, but don't do it while, don't go kick the beehive and then ask for favors. It's not going to help you out at all.
Right. For sure. I mean, so last question I got for you, Tony, and then we can kind of wrap this up. I think this was a great video. And given a situation where maybe that company we were mentioning before, right? Maybe like, let's say you start off as a street level agent, but once you start to move up the ranks and start to maybe build a team, then maybe you don't have the ability to get a release. I've always found that the best way to kind of combat that is when you contract with a new upline. First of all, I think what you said earlier was very telling and very helpful as well. Like, find out what their release process is and their release policy. But it can't always hurt to get an upfront release in writing either. At least maybe not a release, but a document that says we will release you.
Correct. That's the best thing to do. If you're if you're an agent, independent, whatever, and you're contracting with anybody, right, you should absolutely ask them about what's the release process look like with you, right? Ask them, because they're not going to tell you most of the time unless it's a value-added benefit for them, because they offer an open release. But just ask them, like, hey, what's the release process? And if they tell you, well, we honor releases on a whatever basis, go ahead. And even if they tell you, oh, we do an open release policy like we do, even if they tell you that, get it documented. And then you've got it. You've got your golden ticket. And then you can put that in the drawer. You can go work hard. And if ever the deal ever goes sour, you can pull it out and go, hey, I'm sorry, but I got to exercise this. And then you don't even really have to be nice about it, because you've already got it anyway. You can be a jerk then if you want to. Still don't advise it, but you could.
Without naming any names, I talked to an agent recently in the last 2 weeks, and they told me one of the most horrifying things I've ever heard in my whole career, that, they had grown, to essentially the FMO status with this company that we're talking about, had a lot of agents and did a ton of production with this company. And they wanted to move from one FMO to another. The FMO they're trying to move to essentially told them no. They ended up having to essentially, I don't know if I should say this on camera. I'm going to do it anyway. They essentially had to do some favors, I'll say, for the FMO to get them to sign off on a release, and it ended up being incredibly costly. And I thought that was just so terrible. Like, if there's ever an FMO that needs to be blasted on a thread, that's the type that I think would need it, and it'd be warranted, because that's just crap to me. Like, that is just such a horrible thing, I think, for our industry. Like, what it ended up costing this agent to get the release was mind-boggling to me.
Sure. I don't know the details of it. There could certainly be some reasoning behind it that maybe we're not privy to or not, but yeah, I wouldn't be very excited about, I guess, charging an agent money to get them, to get the release. That's gonna, I'll get your release, but it's going to cost you $5,000. How's that sound? Right. No? Okay. 10,000. Yeah, that's not, that wouldn't be a practice I would be fond of, but maybe there's a reason behind it that we're not aware of. Maybe there was some cost in there, some debt, something. Shoot, I had to pay $100 to 800.com to port my number over to the same thing. The same concept, right? I've been doing business with 800.com. I finally, hey, I'm going to Nextiva, and they're like, well, no problem. We'll release your 800 number. It's just going to cost you $100.
Right.
I gladly paid it. I'm like, well, shit.
You just get
I got this number for branding, so I got to do it. But
Right.
it's exact same concept that we're talking about. It's kind of funny.
Right. And that's
people holding you hostage for your business.
That's a fair point too, because we don't know what goes on behind the scenes sometimes. So
Sure.
sometimes when there's a situation going on, like there was an agent that I remember very vividly pretty early on in Medicare Gurus, and they were just blasting this FMO, and I knew somebody that worked at the FMO, and they actually were familiar with the situation. So I ended up talking to them just out of curiosity. I'm like, what is going on? just privately, and come to find out that the agent had a very significant amount of final expense roll-up debt. And so that ended up being a very legitimate reason for not granting the
Absolutely.
release. So like you said, it's a very valid point. Instead of jumping to conclusions, you just don't always know from the outside looking.
Right. And we did deal with a very similar problem with the group that we work with that was already at FMO level on a contract, and they wanted to move it to us. We had some extra value adds that they felt like they weren't getting. And unfortunately, they were blocked, not only, and it got a little more dramatic at some point, but it ended up taking probably, I'd say 14 months. It took over a year for all of that to finally work its way through where that group was able to finally move their contract properly. It took a lot of negotiating, a lot of heartache, so some interesting changes that had to happen contractually in weird ways, but it was a process, 14-month process, but it didn't keep them from writing business. They didn't write business for 14 months in the location that they really wanted to support. So
right.
Yeah, all of that convoluted process exists. It's not going to stop anytime soon. It might get simpler, but release processes aren't going away by any means. They're just either going to get simpler and maybe even more tedious with blackout dates and transfer dates and blockages or whatever. But and ultimately, going back to everything we've said, just to refresh anybody listening, if you're an agent, be informed, ask up front before you ever sign a contract about the release process. Try to get it in writing up front and open release, because that's your golden ticket. And if you ever find yourself in a spot trying to figure it out, call the carrier, ask them what their process is and who has to sign the document.
Right. I think that's great advice. And I think that's a great place to kind of close it out. Tony, thank you for your time. Guys, this was a great video. You probably need to go through and watch this one twice just to kind of make sure that you catch every little thing that was said. I think for me, I think it took me 7-8 years to learn all these processes with all these different carriers, and I still don't have them all down all the way. So I've
been in the business 17 years. I have them all on a cheat sheet. There's no way I'm going to remember all that crap. It's all on a cheat sheet.
Yeah. I mean, it's just crazy because every carrier's got their own different internal processes. And um, Tony, what is the best place people can find you if maybe they might want to do some business with you, do business with PSM through you? Maybe they want to do business with you and Grace in some capacity. I'm not sure what that would look like, but what's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
If you're on Facebook at all, you can find me there pretty easily, Tony Merwin. Otherwise, just look me up over at Precision Senior Marketing. You can Google those 3 words and find our website pretty quick. Or just call me toll free, 800-998-7715. Press 0 and ask for Tony. I'm the only Tony there.
Yeah. And talk a little bit about the insurance syndicate and talk about a little bit about your breakout session at 8% next week.
Oh, cool. Insurance Syndicate's a Facebook group, an extremely rapidly growing Facebook group. It's headed up by Joe Campert of Redwood Agency Group. If you don't know him, he's a monster P&C FMO right here in Austin, Texas with me. We met at Cody Askin's Power Player event last year and became really good friends. So we started this group together, and it's basically just about disrupting the industry through transparency is really what we're trying to do, right? We're just trying to capitalize on kind of what we feel is a movement going on in insurance right now, where doors are getting kicked down and transparent information is becoming more and more relevant or more and more openly shared, right? Some of the topics like we're talking about now, 10 years ago, you guys would have never gotten on and done a video talking about this topic. No way, maybe not even 5 years ago. So we're trying to kind of help push that movement and bring a place together that is open for all lines of insurance business. And it extends further from the group, not just the insurance syndicate, but we have the agent hangouts. We've already got one in Austin. We got one in Houston now. We're working on one in San Antonio. So those are starting to spring up where agents can go network in their local cities through that same kind of mentality and philosophy. But it's an awesome Facebook group. If you are in insurance whatsoever in any line, definitely check out the Insurance Syndicate. Great crew, a lot of good information there. If you're in the Medicare space as well, make sure you're in a Christian's group if you're not already. 6-figure Medicare Agent is phenomenal. And then in regards to 8%, it's next week. We are doing a breakout session. If nothing changes in schedule, we're going to do a breakout session on, actually, matter of fact, we're going the same time you are. We're going Sunday at 9:30. We're competing against each other. So yeah, don't go to Christian's breakout. Come to mine. No, just we're going to be talking about 2 completely different topics, actually. So it doesn't matter. But
stand in the middle of our rooms and have one ear on Tony and one ear on me, and you'll get a little bit of both, and it might work.
Absolutely. Right. Or better yet, get a partner. You go to, and you can attend both that way. But yeah, I'm going Sunday at 9:30. We're going to do kind of the building blocks of scaling a Medicare business, right? Certainly not a topic that you can really fully tackle in 30 minutes, but it's going to be a good overview of information that they can take and likely plug in a lot of the more detailed stuff that they're going to get from stage and from some other breakouts. So we're just going to kind of do it like a broad overview of the building blocks to scale and kind of everything that you got, the stair steps that you're looking towards climbing. So looking forward to it. It's going to be a blast overall.
Well, I love it. I'm sad it's happening at the same time as mine because I won't be able to attend it. But guys, I mean, check it out. If you have no interest in content marketing, there's a good one you can do.
Yes.
And
if you have no interest in scaling a Medicare business, but you like content, definitely go see Christian's.
Yeah, there you go.
If it's anything like your Feed the Beast talk at Medicare Con last year, dude, go listen to this dude talk about content. He's the content king. I don't care what anybody else tells you. I don't care what other guys you're following out there. This dude has more content, more hours invested in sitting behind the camera and sitting in front of people and talking about the topic of Medicare and insurance and building a business than just about anybody else out there, especially at his tender young age.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. And, it's just one of those things. I was talking to someone the other day and I'm like, they're like, I'm just not comfortable in front of the camera. I'm like, here's a news flash. No one is.
No one is.
Camera enough. And then all of a sudden you just get numb to it and then you just don't care anymore. But like, it just,
right.
It's like, the 10,000 hour thing, right?
Yeah, I remember, I still look back on my very first podcast that I did with anybody. It was the 8% Nation podcast I did with Cody and Landon, which was good. I mean, it was a great podcast. We killed it. But then I noticed how I presented myself there versus how I am now, just from a comfort standpoint. I could definitely see that I'm much more comfortable to sit here. It's not a big deal anymore. Like I was crapping my pants before. I was like, oh my God, going on this podcast. I've never done a podcast before. What's that going to be about? And I was all nervous. my brother was just like, you're going to be fine. It'll be great. Like, you're going to kill it. And then I did it. And then I was like, that's not a big deal. What's the big deal? Just get behind the camera and talk to people.
That's it. It's just having a conversation. Like I did an interview last year with a person that heads a big FMO, and I won't use the name, but like the interview's on the channel. It ended up being a great interview, but he was visibly nervous, before we did it. I'm like you guys service tens of thousands of agents and you're scared of this? This is nothing.
Yes.
And he killed it. He did a great job, but it's
a form of public speaking, right? Even if you're not looking at especially if you're by yourself sitting in your office with the camera staring at it, it still has that same sensation. No, it still gives you that same sensation of public speaking and having that fear, which is, I appreciate you letting me get to there, because I can plug our public speaking workshop that I'm doing with Cody coming up at the end of September. Look out for that. If you want to increase your chops to sit behind a camera or in an audience, it's a killer workshop.
Well, awesome. That'll be a blast, and looking forward to kind of seeing that, transpire and kind of how that goes, and kind of seeing how many people it touches. Well, Tony, thanks for your time. This video was
thank you.
It was fantastic. And guys, thanks so much for watching. Check out Tony, connect with Tony if you're not connected with him already. Join the Insurance Syndicate, and also like this video. Comment on how you don't like my shiny head, whatever you want to comment on. I don't really care. And subscribe, hit the notification bell so you're notified when we upload. And here's to your success and your abundance. We'll be back next time. Thanks, guys.